I worked with Louis-Claude Nyassa. I worked with Yusufa Dauda. I was the legal advisor of all of these 5 individuals who are respectable Cameroonians. I worked at SNEC with Obufege. I lived in Bipanda. I lived in Bonamusadi before I went to pursue further studies in the United States. I did not need anybody to introduce me to Cameroon. The third point is that one of the things that really irks me is the arrogance of certain elites, so-called elites of the ruling party. I have seen how people have been attacked, even for making recommendations that were the most benign and the most objective and the most fair-minded. If you are of the media and you write an article which is critical, which is the role of the media, you get harassed for it. I haven't seen the kind of open-mindedness that I've seen in a number of African countries, where ruling party officials create space for dialogue, where they can put their points forward and receive feedback from people who have other political views than theirs. That explains some of the issues that I talked about when I talked about very polarized debates. We don't have room for dialogue across party lines in our country. And that's why from time to time, the only way in which people express themselves is to stage demonstrations. If we were a functioning democracy, we should have those opportunities. We should have them through the media. We should have them through civil society organizations and think tanks that come up with policy recommendations. We should have them in parliament, where members of parliament can introduce bills, even members of opposition parties can introduce bills, that these bills are debated upon openly, and even members of parliament from the ruling party can introduce legislation. There have been many countries where members of parliament from the ruling party have introduced legislation that have helped to strengthen the democratic institutions of those countries. Next door in Nigeria, in 2007, when President Obasanjo wanted to amend the constitution of Nigeria, it was the parliament of Nigeria, the senators and the members of the House, who were majority PDP legislators, who said that that would weaken the democratic process in Nigeria, and they voted down Obasanjo's amendment. There was an open debate that was carried live by private media, not even by the state media in Nigeria. And the Nigerian population said they wanted to see how each member of parliament voted on this particular issue. When Chiluba in Zambia wanted to amend the constitution of the country to also give himself a third term, it was the MMD parliamentarians of his own political party which said this couldn't happen to our country. It's the same thing that happened with President Muluzi in Malawi. So we don't see those kinds of debates in our own National Assembly. Because when you stand up and you make a suggestion that someone doesn't agree with, immediately you are attacked in your person, not on principle, not on your idea. And so I think that with what I can bring to my country, if I stood out there and that the test, the benchmark that I had for myself was what would please one individual or the other, I would be doing a serious disservice to my country. I cannot, in my conscience, allow myself to subject myself to the point where I would only speak out on the issues that would please one or two elites. Because deep down in their hearts, many of them, in private conversations, would tell you the same things that a lot of Cameroonians say in public. Where do you think my classmates are? My classmates with whom I went to Yaoundé, who went to Enam, who went into magistracy, and who didn't have the opportunity that some of us had to go study out of the country. They're working for this government. They're working for the state. They are of my generation. And they feel strongly about the future of this country the same way that I feel. In many ways, some of us on the outside, outside of government, are doing a great service, even to people who are in government and who mean well for the country, and who wish they had the opportunity to also make their voices heard. My wish for this country is that we will ultimately get to the point where every Cameroonian will feel they have a contribution to make, and will make that contribution knowing that their ideas will be taken into consideration and their person will not be attacked for that. I feel very proud of my contribution thus far, and I feel very comfortable with what I'm doing for my country.
So do you think that the country will be able to have 2 elections in 6 months as presidential, which I'll say was the legislative, and the municipal and the legislative should be 2012?
The issue of the economy of elections in Africa and in the developing world at large is an issue that has been raised very often. And you have had some people who think that elections are a very expensive exercise, and that given some of the other economic issues that countries have to deal with, they could forego the possibility of having elections. My viewpoint is slightly different for 2 reasons. One, the principal reason that you save more in economic terms by having a credible election than by not having an election. When you look at what the countries that I mentioned have suffered because of failed elections, their economies have really taken a hit. There was a time when no tourists could go to Kenya because of what was happening there. Zimbabwe is now a basket case, no investor is going there because of what is happening. So when you have a good election, on the other hand, there is always a natural bonus that comes with it. When you look at the economic investments in Ghana, at one point, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire had the same GDP. But because Cote d'Ivoire was submerged in its political crisis, its GDP plunged at a time when Ghana's GDP was going up. And just because in the last 12 years, Ghana has had a series of successful elections, when everybody talks about democracy and a good enabling environment for the economy, for investors, today in Africa, people cite Ghana as a success story. There's a bonus that comes from it, just because of the eagerness of investors to come in and to invest, and people to want to do business, because there's a sense that this country has its act together and it's doing well. My second explanation is that elections do not necessarily have to be expensive. There's always a false impression in the minds of some people that elections is about, well, biometrics is the new thing now. It's biometrics, it's computers, it's sophisticated machines. I went to one country where someone was talking about electronic voting in a country that had 20% electricity and constant power failures. So there's some people who think that election is an opportunity to buy the latest gadgets on the market. But for me, elections are about political space and political will. If you create the political space and you have the political will to do the right thing, you can have a very cheap election, but an election that will represent the will of the people and that would strengthen the institutions of the country and give the country a good image. Let me just take one simple example that we're facing here in Cameroon. The issue of multiple ballots. Here we are, looking at a presidential election that's going to have 21 candidates. If all 21 candidates are allowed to run, or if some of those that have petitioned the courts are allowed back into the race, we're going to have, because we don't have a single ballot, we're going to have to print
7.5 million
times 21. You make the count. If we have approximately, for the purpose of our conversation, if we have 8 million registered voters, and by the way, I'm a registered voter, and I plan to be here for the election. If we have 8 million registered voters, you have to give a percentage of ballots to make room for spoiled ballots. So you probably print 125% of ballots to the number of registered voters. So 125% of 8 million is 10 million. So you would have to print 10 million ballots multiplied by 21 candidates. And just imagine what that's going to do to the public treasury of our country and to the budget of Eleka. If we had a single ballot, then we would not print more than 10 million ballots for our election. And there, just right there, you can see